Well, welcome everyone to the Dad Central Show. My name is Drew Solon, and as you notice, I'm not here with Ed today. He's actually enjoying a much needed break, but we're all set to have a great conversation because our goal is to give dads the tools needed to raise confident and successful kids. Of course, a reminder that the Dad Central Show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. And so today, you'll see we are grateful to be hosting Dr. Stuart Shanker on the show, and we're going to be talking about self-regulation. Now, if you aren't quite sure what self-regulation is and why it matters, then this is obviously going to be a great conversation for you to listen in on. So let's face it, every day, I think we face countless pressures and stresses. So if you just take a look at the last 2 years, I personally can't think of a more stressful time in my lifetime. So those challenges really aren't going away anytime soon. Really, you wonder, well, what can a parent do? How can you manage the reality that we will have stress? And so I think that's why this conversation today is going to be so valuable. And I'm really excited to have Dr. Shanker here to help us with this vital topic. Now, before we get started, let me give you a brief intro to our guest. And so Dr. Shanker is a distinguished research professor emeritus of philosophy and psychology. He's also the founder and visionary of the Merit Center and Self-Reg Global Incorporated. Now, one of his many books, Calm, Alert, and Learning, Classroom Strategies for Self-Regulation, is a top-selling educational publication in Canada. Another one of his books, titled Self-Reg, How to Help Your Child and You Break the Stress Cycle and Successfully Engage with Life, has garnered enthusiastic reviews and media attention throughout North America. It's also been published in the United Kingdom, United States, Poland, Germany, China, South Korea, Japan, the Netherlands, Georgia, and the Czech Republic. So a lot of places. His latest books are Self-Reg Schools, a handbook for educators, and Reframed, Self-Reg for a Just Society. So Dr. Shanker, thank you so much. Welcome to the show. Really glad to have you here.
Good morning, Drew. It's nice to be here.
Great. Well, as my intro said, stress is everywhere. Self-regulation is certainly maybe something that's very relevant and very vital for this time just in the world. But maybe you can start by telling us, how did you get started in this area of self-regulation?
Well, it was a long time ago. I was a student at Oxford, and I did my PhD in the philosophy of mathematics. But I was looking at something really interesting, which are called self-modifying or self-regulating algorithms. And I won't explain what those are, but but basically, I went a postdoc, and I started to work on the physiology of self-regulation as well as the psychology. This was a real big topic in the early 20th century. It was the founder was a guy called Walter Bradford Cannon. He was a physiologist, and he was really interested in the self-regulating mechanisms in the brain and the body. Mm-hmm. And essentially, the definition that he created and that inspired the 20th century work in this area was how we manage stress. Hmm. And the definition of stress, the scientific definition, is any stimulus that requires us to burn energy in order to stay in something called homeostasis, and that means in balance. That means, everything's working the way it should. Our heart is working well, our guts are working well. So I was working on that and wrote a book about how this theory was developing in the 1960s. And when I came to Canada in '84, somebody read the book and asked me if I would write an article on self-regulation for educators and parents. And they sent me a couple of articles to help me, get a sense of what was going on in Canada at the time. This is probably maybe mid-90s. And I read these papers and I thought, well, this is interesting, but has absolutely nothing to do with what I'd been working on at Oxford. Because what they were talking about when they used the term self-regulation was how we regulate, control our thoughts or our emotion or our behavior. It was really a form of self-control, but that's not at all the way the early pioneers talked about self-regulation. It's not the way I thought about self-regulation. So I wrote a paper explaining that there's this fundamental distinction between self-regulation, dealing with stress, and self-control. And we really wanted to get clear on what self-regulation means, because what we're trying to do, when we're raising a child or a teen, is help them deal with stress in a really healthy, constructive way. And I just want to add one last thing, Drew, and then we can get going. It's important to understand that we are bathed in stress. When a scientist talks about stress, remember my initial definition. Light is a stress. Noise is a stress. Crowds are a stress. People are a stress. When a newborn comes into the world at the moment of birth, they are really exposed to a huge burst of stress that they haven't encountered in the womb. The biggest stress for a newborn is light. They've come from a dark environment, and light is a stress. These are photons that are, hitting the skin, hitting the eyes. And in order to stay, keep your heart breathing normally or keep your blood pressure normal, you have to burn energy. And so the baby, the newborn, actually has a couple of self-regulating mechanisms. And one of the most important that it has is falling asleep. And when a baby falls asleep, what they're doing is reducing the amount of light that's coming into their brain. It's a complicated area, and I won't go into detail, but the important point is that these self-regulating mechanisms that a baby's born with are really limited in how much in how much they can manage stress. I'll give you a great example. Cannon's original definition of stress was cold weather. Cold weather is a stress. So I don't have to explain that to any Canadian. Drew's smiling because we're all just waiting for it to happen now. When we get cold, we have to maintain an internal body temperature of around 37 degrees. And this is especially important for the brain. The brain doesn't like it when it gets too hot or too cold. So what happens when the temperature drops outside is there's a little thermal regulator deep in the limbic system, and it's something called the hypothalamus. And what it does is it says, oh my God, it's getting cold. So it triggers muscular contractions. That's what shivering is. That's what your teeth chattering are, and some other things. And what this does is muscular contractions release heat as a byproduct, and that's how we stay warm. But if you think about it, using any muscle, even shivering, burns energy. So that's a classic example of how the brain triggers a response to burn energy so that we stay warm. But a baby, it only has a couple of limited abilities to manage its internal body temperature. So the newborn can be lying right beside a blanket, but of course the newborn doesn't have the ability to reach over and pull the blanket up over it. So we as caregivers, we're watching our baby and we can tell, and I'll come back to this a little bit later, it's more than just reading the signs, but when our baby is cold, we'll put the blanket on her or take the blanket off when the baby's hot. So we are acting as external regulators or co-regulators until the baby can start to do it for itself. So that's where I came from. And what happened was there was this, like, there's a very big response. People wanted to learn more about what stress is, what managing stress is. And so I ended up spending, I don't know, what is it now? The last 25 years of my life just working in this area.
Mhm.
So that's the answer to your question.
Well, thank you for that background. I think it's always interesting. And what I found actually very fascinating was the distinction you created there between self control versus self regulation, and then that
Yeah.
whole relationship with stress.
Yeah.
That's something that, when I hear the word self regulation, and maybe many of the people listening, they think, oh, I got to control myself. That's what it's about. But we were saying it's much deeper, much more complex, but it's related to this idea of energy and energy management and responding to stresses.
That's
Is
right.
that right?
Yeah, that's exactly.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. Well, then let's get right into it then. So can you talk then, what is self-regulation? And because we're talking to dads here, why is it important for dads?
Well, right now, you mentioned this in your opening remarks. You said how you've been more stressed in the last couple of years than at any point in your life. Well, we monitor pretty closely stress-related disorders in children and teens and in adults. And when we talk about a stress-related disorder, it can be psychological. It could be something like an anxiety disorder, or it could be physical. It could be something like an ulcer. And so what we're seeing in kids is, of all ages, is an explosion of both. And I've never seen anything like this. It's at the point now where our hard data is telling us that at least half of all teens or half of all youth have an anxiety disorder. That's a very strong term. It's a term we don't use lightly. It's a term that comes out of the DSM manual. The reality is probably a lot worse than that. And in fact, there is anecdotal evidence that pretty much every teen now is struggling with anxiety. On top of that, we are seeing an explosion of physical problems related to stress, and those could be things like obesity. Not nearly as bad here in Canada as in the US, but still worrying. But we're also seeing cardiovascular problems, not just in teens, but also in kids. We're seeing gastrointestinal problems in children. We're seeing now epidemics of physical disorders that that we never ever, when I went to the university, we never ever thought that kids could get these. So then the question for dads is, we've got two questions, why and what can I do about it? And the why, there are, three sort of primary reasons that we think are driving this. And one is the obvious one, just that the stress levels are very, very high. But, there have been other periods in history where stress has been very, very high, but we haven't seen the same sort of, let's say, mental health epidemics. So there has to be something else involved here. And so there's two more factors that we think are critical. One of them is that kids today of all ages are drawn to what are called maladaptive modes of self-regulation. A maladaptive mode of self-regulation is something that maybe gives you temporary relief, but creates even further stress down the road. And down the road may not be that far down the road. So, the classic example would be, say, the adult who drinks in order to sedate themselves when they're under a lot of stress. But we know that drinking or smoking, these create so many downstream problems. But now what we're seeing in kids is we've seen, and here is one of the areas where Canada, unfortunately, is leading the world. We're seeing but this is maladaptive, and it's maladaptive for a couple of reasons. One is it causes physical problems, and two, it does nothing to deal with the stresses themselves. So what happens is you sedated, but you haven't dealt with whatever it was that was stressing you. And then the third factor, which is really the important one for dads, is okay, so they're doing the wrong things, but conversely, they're not doing the right things. And what are the right things? Well, one of the most important right things is going to their dad. One of the most important things when the child is overstressed is, instead of blocking out your father, you need to go to your father. And now here's something really, really, you want to say something, Drew, or you're going to cough? And now here's something really, really interesting. So I talked at the outset about, you got these self-regulating mechanisms, mechanisms in the brain and the body for dealing with stress. Now remember my definition. The definition of stress is anything that requires us to burn energy in order to stay in balance. And remember what I also said, that we're bathed in stress. Everything is a stress. It's not just the stress of COVID. It's not just the stress of the environment or politics or mom and dad are stressed or money, but it's also all those physical stresses. The stress of, I don't know, take your pick, and the stress of being alone. This is a real big stress. One of the big discoveries that we've made, I haven't mentioned this, but the science has just been exploding, especially over the last 10 years. One of the big discoveries that we made is that deep, deep, deep in the brain, we have neurons that drive us not to be alone, that drive us to be with others. And most importantly, that drive us to our parents. Why? And the answer is, okay, every time you have a stress, you start to burn energy. Drew said that really well, right? So you got all this stress, and you're constantly having to tap in to your energy reserves. What turns the stress off? The answer is a really interesting one. What turns it off? A couple of neurochemicals. One of them is called oxytocin. The other one are endogenous opioids. These turn off the stress response right where it starts, deep in the brain. So that's really interesting. We've got one mechanism that triggers burning energy, and we've got another mechanism that turns off the energy. Okay, what turns on the energy burning? Well, that's easy. I gave you examples. It could be the cold weather. It could be you're worried about other kids at school. It could be whatever. We can figure out what the stresses are, and a lot of them are invisible. The interesting question is, what turns it off? Now, I told you, a couple of neurochemicals, oxytocin, opioids. So what triggers them? Well, we have in our skin all kinds of receptors that when we touch our kid's skin, stroke it, we trigger the release of oxytocin and opioids. We're turning off the stress response. When I talk to my child in a soothing, gentle voice, I trigger oxytocin. In fact, we now think that soothing, gentle voice is also a form of touch. You are caressing the child's eardrum. Our children were designed by nature to come to us when they're overstressed. And we turn off their stress. We turn off the energy burning. And now I'm going to tell you one last thing, and then I'll let Drew come up for air. Here's the most incredible part about all of this. When we do this to our kid, okay, so let's say give the kid a hug. We give, that warm embrace or scratching or just being together. Kid gets the oxytocin, turns off the stress response, and the same thing happens to us. When I do this to my child, it triggers in me oxytocin and opioids. And this is one of the big reasons why there's this fundamental distinction between self-regulation and self-control. Self-control keeps us apart from each other. Self-control keeps us at a distance. We become the disciplinarian or punishing. There's no intimacy. There's no oxytocin going. Instead of turning off the stress response, we're making it even worse. So that's a little bit of neurochemistry. And if you want to learn more, you're going to have to come to our website and do one of our courses.
All right. Well, to me, I mean, there was a lot in what you shared. I want to go back to, you talked about the 3 responses, and you talked about this idea of a maladaptive responses to stress. And then you talked about, not doing the right things. Right. But that brought us into this point that you were making there at the end of, what to do about turning the stress response on and off. And for me, if I just take it as practically, physical touch between a parent and a child, talking in a soothing voice, which is, as you said, like touch, it's like a caress of the eardrums. That releases oxytocin. And so, and those are the types of simple responses or behaviors that a parent can employ that are not only helping the child's stress response, there's this powerful effect of helping the parent's stress response too.
Perfect.
And so what that reminds me of, one of the people that I have been looking and learning from over the past however many years in my parenting journey is Dr. Laura Markham. And, she has this concept of not a time out, a time in, because when a child is struggling, they don't need to be isolated, which is almost exactly what you just said. What they need connection. They need relationship. And so the concept of how do you engage that process to reduce the child's stress and your stress is the opposite of what a lot of people would talk about. Well, your kid's misbehaving, give them the time out. You take your break and they take their break. It's actually what you're saying is the science says it's not right.
And I love what she's saying. And I think she's got it right, exactly right. So what are they doing? That's an interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
Because they obviously... go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, they're obviously doing something wrong or we wouldn't have epidemics, right? So what are they doing?
Okay. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things. I think that, to me, very practically, because that's what we want to give dads tools. Step 1, you can touch your child in a positive, gentle, kind way. Speak to them in the same kind, and that helps you and helps them. So that right there is simple. But I want to maybe ask this question. So why would you say it's very important then for dads to even be aware of their own stress? Because I think, I'm going to be honest, and I look at my journey as a dad, I haven't always been aware of how stressed I actually was. Right. And it just kind of came out, and I'm like, or I'm impatient or I'm intolerant. And I'm like, I don't even know why. And then next thing I think about it, maybe the day or 2 or 3 days later, I'm like, you know what? This was kind of bothering me, but I wasn't aware of it. And I'm just full of honesty. And maybe there are a lot of other dads who are like that. Maybe they aren't. Maybe like, Drew, you're out to lunch, buddy. You should just get to know yourself better. But I think it's an important question, at least talk about, why is it important for dads to be aware of their own stress?
Okay, so I definitely have to class myself with you on this one. I'd be very
I'm not
surprised.
alone. Thank you.
You ain't alone. Okay, so can I do a little bit more science?
Absolutely.
Okay, so like there's some obvious points here. The obvious points are just for your own well-being. You want to if kids are overstressed today, I've never seen parental stress like I am seeing. And parents are getting it from, every direction. And so we're worried about our kids. I worry about my two boys all the time. This is a tough time for teens. We're getting it from work. We're getting, so just for our own well-being, we have to do self-reg. We have to, and we'll get into that in a couple of minutes, what that means. But there's another point. It's a really interesting one. And I don't want to just repeat the obvious points, that you have to be grounded in order to be able to soothe and so on. One of the most surprising discoveries that we've made in neuroscience, I was just reading a review. Somebody's just come out with a whole book on this. And Drew, I'm sure you can find it. I read the review within the last 2 or 3 days. It's a concept called secondary altriciality. And what it means is that all babies, every single baby, is born premature. Our babies are born somewhere between 2 to 4 months premature. And when they are born, they are still a fetus. And we call them the fetus outside the womb. So there's a fetus inside the womb and a fetus in the external outside womb. Okay? The reasons for this are interesting, and we won't do them today, but they have to do with the human brain is our greatest asset, but most of the growth occurs after birth. In fact, at the moment of birth, synaptic growth, the growth of neuronal connections, explodes. 700 new synapses form every single second. Okay, so this thing is just going boom. And so it looks like we gave birth to our babies because we'd reached the sort of maximum size that human females could give birth to them. But we wanted the big brain, so they remain a fetus for a couple of months. And if you think about your own baby, like they were totally helpless. Now, it raises a really interesting question for scientists. If you want to argue this way, then what takes the place of the umbilical cord? Okay, so they're attached to the mother via the umbilical cord in the womb. We severed the umbilical cord at birth. But if you want to keep on talking about them as still being a fetus, what takes that same role? And the answer is something that we call the interbrain. Okay, so that's a term that was coined by Digby Tantum. And the interbrain is a wireless brain-to-brain connection. It's, without a picture of the brain to show you, but basically, this part of your brain, that's your thinking part. That's the part where we use language, where we problem solve and so on. That's the part that's growing. And it's growing at a furious pace, and it's going to continue growing until the kid's 24 years old. That's not the part that's in the interbrain. The interbrain is between my limbic system and the baby's limbic system. This is the subcortex, the part below the prefrontal cortex. So we have a limbic to limbic connection. And we have it every bit as strong in dads as in moms. So dads have every bit as strong a limbic connection with their baby's brain. Now, what does that mean? What it means is it's not a case of dad trying to learn the signs of, let's stick with where we were. You're not learning to read, interpret when my baby's cold. If I have this limbic to limbic connection, I feel, literally feel, when my baby is cold. So, what blocks this interbrain? That's our big question, because you're going to have that interbrain with your kid their entire life. And there are going to be periods when that interbrain connection is incredibly important, especially when they're teens. That interbrain is still functioning between you and your kid. If my kid is really angry or really agitated, I get really angry and really agitated. I share that emotion. It's a phenomenon that's called limbic resonance. And what happens is that my kid's emotional state or physical is transmitted to me instantly, way before language occurs. So I need to be able to step back, and I'll tell you how you do it as a dad in a second, from, what if my kid's really hyper aroused, and I want to do the things that Drew just said. I want to have that soothing voice and I want to have that soothing presence, but I can't do that if I am hyper aroused. Okay, so that's one point. The second point, and Drew drew attention to this a second ago. There are days when, I'm just irritable. I just, I don't know, I'll snap at anybody. I had one yesterday where I got mad at my wife because she ran out of, I like silk coffee creamer. How nuts is that? But the problem is there's one big thing that blocks the interbrain, that stops me from feeling what my kid is feeling. And that is stress. And the stress can be emotional stress. It can be physical stress. It can be something called cognitive stress, which is a big domain that we work on. But the point is that if the interbrain is blocked between me and my kid, I can't feel what's going on. I can't feel whether what I'm doing is actually calming my kid down. So not only, just to come back, go full circle to Drew's original question, not only do I need to do self-reg in order to manage my own stress, I need to do self-reg in order to keep that connection that Drew was talking about open, what Laura Markham's doing. I need to do self-reg so that we are communicating with each other at a deep brain-to-brain limbic level. So one of the things we teach dads is this. When your kid does something that is making you absolutely nuts, and so as the father of two teenage boys, let me say that this is going to happen, on an hourly basis? Whatever. You ask yourself two questions. The first question is why? And the second question is why now? And the reason we're doing that, there's a couple of factors involved. One is I genuinely want to know what's happening inside my kid's subcortex. What's producing all this? And this is a big reason why we distinguish between self-regulation and self-control. I want to know if my kid is misbehaving or if this is a stress behavior. By asking why and why now, what I'm doing is I break the limbic contagion, the limbic resonance. I'm in order to ground myself, I have to not share my kid's hyperarousal. So I ask why and why now, to calm myself down. And then there are various things you can do to make sure, you can do your breathing, you can do whatever. But the point is this is where Drew was leading us. It's that in order for me to soothe, I have to be in a state where I myself am soothed, where I myself am calm. I can lend my child my calm. I can literally trigger the neurochemicals that will calm my kid's brain down, whatever age, but only if I'm calm myself. Otherwise, I can't. Otherwise, what's going to happen is I have a different set of neurochemicals called catecholamines that are running the show. And then before you know it, you're both shouting.
Okay. There was so much in that. I'm gonna do my best to try and summarize, just because I want to really make sure I get it, because this is something that obviously is very important. I'm gonna say it this way about this whole limbic resonance and the brain development of children, and the connection to parents. Essentially, what you're saying is we have Wi-Fi with our kids.
That's it.
Okay, but
That's
it's feelings Wi-Fi.
That's it.
Okay. And then the other powerful thing you said that I want to make sure every dad catches this, or even every mom or every person catches this. What you're saying is that resonance is equally as strong for dads as it is for moms.
Yep.
And so, you hear this, you have mother's intuition, moms know, they feel what the kids, actually dads feel the exact same thing. It just might be blocked because there are stressors or stress that may be blocking that and disrupting the ability of the dad to feel, or vice versa, the child to feel from the dad.
Yep.
Okay. And then,
Drew, can I add something to that?
Yeah, please.
Well, this is another area where self-control has this sort of insidious effect, because when my own children would come up, my wife would come to me when it was time for the parental discipline. I was to be the one who exercised the self-control. That was my role as father.
Mm.
But what really needed to happen was we both needed to reframe what was going on in my kid. But it was interesting how these old, Victorian views about the role of the dad were screwing everything up. They were screwing me up, and they were screwing the kid up.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really important point. And I think that's why I wanted to bring this up is, recognizing moms and dads both have tremendous value, but they also have this ability to feel and connect in the same way and work together. But also, I'm assuming, we're not going to talk about this today, but there's that limbic resonance between mom and dad, or parents. And that is a critical piece too. We're not going to go there right now.
Wait, I got to go there.
You want to go? Let me just one more thing about this. So what you said was, this is what we teach dads, and it's really this asking why and why now, which is essentially, it's like a stopgap. It stops you from having this cascading reaction. And so the way that I perceive that is, I need to explore the rationale or what's going on here before reacting. Asking those questions helps me explore as opposed to just react, which obviously is very important. So we need to do that. And then the other thing is being able to then move so they can trigger the positive chemicals to be released in the situation. So both the effect is for the dads as well as for the child or anyone else that you're dealing with.
That's really good.
Okay. All right. Did you want to go there now and talk about this limbic resonance between parents and partners?
Just for a second.
Yeah.
Okay, so my older boy is on the spectrum, and my younger boy has pretty serious ADHD. So we'll just do the older boy. So, fortunately, I was trained in psychiatry by Stanley Greenspan. So, my background when I started psychiatry was autism. And I ran a big program at York University, which was an autism study. So, I spent a lot of time learning the signs of when a child on the spectrum is overstressed. My wife has not had this experience, hasn't had this studying. So I'll just give you one single example. Just about a week ago, my son, my older boy, he's almost 21. He was being really autistic, and you know, like in self-reg we call it going red brain. So he was in red brain, totally irrational, and she and he had locked horns, and they were both getting really, really, you know, it's shouting, and you know, he's never gonna be able to drive the car again for the rest of his life. And so I came in because I could see that this wasn't going very well. And what I did, literally, was I gave my son, he's a big guy, I gave him a hug. And the effect was almost instant. And so he started to come down. And then I said to him really gently, do you understand why mom got upset? But I said it in a very slow, low voice. And then, so we proceeded, the escalation stopped on a dime. And then he was able to, you know, he was taking my contact, was stimulating all the stuff Drew was talking about, was stimulating the oxytocin. He's coming down. And then my wife afterwards, this is like 2 minutes later, we're sitting down together, and she says, oh my God. So, but I didn't lecture her. But what happened was that it turned into a three-way resonance, that as he came down, she came down. And then she had this like epiphany. And she said to me, I didn't realize that this was just one of his, you know, he was having what's called a fugue. It was one of his autistic fugues. And when that happens, you can't use reason because the kids, you know, that part of the brain is shut down. But the point is exactly what Drew said. So here, what we're going to do is, as we learn self-reg, we don't have to go into lecture mode in our family. That resonance is going to occur, and we're all going to learn from each other. And I had, you know, yesterday, my wife was the one who had to do it to me because I was freaking out because I didn't have silk for my coffee, you know. So, but once you bring self-reg into the house, into the household, it's interesting how the temperature just comes down, and we learn strategies to keep it down.
Well, I really appreciate that story. And thank you for sharing it. It reminds me of, well, I've been doing this for a while now with my kids, but one, I talk about how many hugs do you need a day? It's just kind of, it's like a joke, right? And so I go to them, hey, how many hugs do you need? And they give me the wrong answer on purpose. And then I go after them and we tickle it, and I usually get the hug. But I didn't realize how effective it was in the eye of the storm, because what you were talking about was your wife was in the eye of the storm with your son.
Exactly.
And
right.
I happened to just stumble upon this because, you know, I was feeling myself getting agitated, and my kids, and then I've got three of them. I got twins and a you know, twin 9-year-old daughters and a 7-year-old son. And I mean, so I've been playing this now for a few years, which is thankful I found it. They would kind of get agitated. I get agitated. And then I was like, you know, how many hugs do you need a day? And then they would get irritated at me, and then they'd give me the wrong answer. And then I'd go after them. And next thing you know, we're all laughing, having a good time. And it's like the whole thing that came up that was irritating us is like long gone. It's history.
I can't.
And so, pardon?
I cannot add to that. That's just a wonderful example.
Yeah. And so that's what I heard from you in terms of, oh, you know, I unwittingly, I didn't know it. I didn't understand the science, but what you're saying, what I have basically heard from you is that what you're doing is actually applying this in principle. And so I just want to say that I really appreciate it because I've seen it work. So I want to say it's not just an idea, it works. And I've experienced it. So that's really powerful. So to me, that's a takeaway, right? That's what dads need to do. And so I'm just mindful of time, and we haven't even gotten into, you know, the 5 practices. And so my thoughts are, I would love to maybe have you back on another show. So let's wrap up or move towards kind of wrapping up. I want to ask you, you started to touch on it there, but, you know, as a father, what's helped you the most with your own self-reg journey?
I'll tell you another story about my older boy. In a small percentage of kids on the spectrum, they are athletic phenoms. It's interesting, and we can explain why. We have a pretty good idea why. And my son was an extraordinary hockey player, extraordinary. And when he was 12, a bunch of scouts came to watch him play. And so I had these dreams, that I was going to help my autistic boy, find a path in life where he could be a hockey star, play for the Leafs. And then when he turned 14, the wheels fell off. And I got I was pissed off because the coach said to me, "So here's my kid now, and he's being groomed." And the coach says to me, "I don't know what's going on, but he's just not trying." And so everybody said to me, not everybody, but that was the theme. The theme was that it's a lack of motivation. He doesn't, if he's going to live up to his talent, he's got to apply himself. And so here I am in a self-control mindset at the very time that I'm writing books about this, thinking that he needs discipline, he needs to push himself. And I'm getting angry at him because, I can see him on the ice now. All of a sudden he's hanging back. And so there was one sort of really, really upsetting episode on the ice. And I was fit to be tied. And so we're going home together. He's sitting beside me. And I said to him in an angry tone, "What the hell was going on there tonight?" And he answered in a really soft voice, "I can't stand being hit, Dad." And what had happened was he was a wonderful hockey player until he transitioned to checking. And he's autistic. And so for him, I had forgotten, he's very, very hypersensitive to pain. It's called nociceptive activation. And his reaction to being hit wasn't like the other kids. And oh my God, here I was not listening to my child, not listening to what his brain was telling me. And I must have caused him, because I was his source of security and safety. And here I was, I'd taken that away. The one person he could come to, and I don't know where he got the balls to tell me what he was upset about, but he did. And that transformed everything. And then I suddenly realized that this is about my child being happy in life. And he's not going to be happy if I can't listen. And I can't listen if my mind is stuck in these old stereotypes. So ever since then, it was a real lesson for me, a real wake-up call, how easy it is to lose sight of who the child is and what the child needs because of my own projection. So that for me was, I don't know, probably the single greatest epiphany that I had about why I needed to do self-reg.
I think that's a fitting place for us to end off, because as a take-home message for any other dad, knowing your own child and being able to respond to their specific needs is probably one of the best pieces of advice you could probably offer. And I think that story is a great example and a great model of how you need to do that in order to ensure that you're providing the best for them as they grow. So I just want to say thank you so much for that. But dads probably want more of this. Where can listeners go if they want to learn more about self-regulation in parenting?
Okay, so my second book is a good way to start. That one's called Self-Reg. That's a 2016 book. But if they go onto the website, self-reg.ca, there's all kinds of stuff they can get for free. all kinds of information sheets and so on. That's a good place to start.
Okay. That's great. Well, Dr. Shanker, it's been a real honor and a pleasure to hear and learn more about your journey, the specifics about self-regulation, the differences between self-control versus managing your energy, and all the very practical, actually, applications of some simple things the parents can do to manage their own stress, but also to help their children in the process. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to staying connected and learning more and of continuing my own self-reg journey as a parent.
Thanks a lot, Drew. I've enjoyed it.
All right, excellent. Well, normally Ed and I would do a little wrap up here, but I think the simplest thing that I can say is that we're just really grateful for the opportunity to have guests that can come on and share amazing insights that we can then take and apply in our fatherhood journeys. And so to me, that last story is very powerful, but I'd encourage you to take a listen to some of the other things that were mentioned today in the episode and be able to apply them into your own fatherhood journey. So as always, we really look forward to hearing from people, and we love to get feedback on the show. Please, you can reach out to us at podcast@dadcentral.ca. That's our email address there. Of course, if you want to listen to other episodes, more shows that we've got, other experts, other great content, you can go to dadcentral.ca/podcast. Of course, we do have some wonderful resources as well that if you wanted to check out, we have them on our website. It is dadcentral.ca. So thanks so much for listening. Again, a reminder that the Dad Central Show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man, because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. So thanks very much for listening to the show. We look forward to talking to you next time.